Hi, I'm Elliot, and this is my podcast, Hiki-Goma. The first question you might be asking is, what the fuck is a Hiki-Goma? Hiki-Goma is a Japanese manga term. It basically means the last panel of a page before you turn the page. It's a panel that basically draws you onto the next page, makes you want to read on. And I thought that that was a good, if not slightly pretentious, title for a podcast that I want to be about my experiences writing and making manga for the past 3 years that hopefully can help pull other people along in does that make sense, like metaphorically? So most people at the time of recording would probably know me from YouTube, like 99.9%. I run a film slash TV slash general video essay channel. I say run, but I haven't made a video in like 3 years for a couple of reasons, just to really distill it. It's basically copyright problems and just a time, viability thing as well. And also I wanted to get more into more actual creative stuff that involved, writing and directing and so on. So basically, for the past 3 years, as I said before, I wrote basically a long manga series that I'm only now starting to produce. But just before this, I've produced a couple of different projects. I directed this short film that's playing on screen now. It's called Faith On, or Runway. I haven't actually chosen a title. Unfortunately, it's not finished yet. But here's, I guess, just some footage so you can see what it looks like. I also shot this film called The Motor Kings, and I co-edited this film, which is also not finished. Doesn't have finished color or sound, I believe. And so I worked on those in around about 2019 during my final year of film school. And then from that point, I spent quite a long time, basically 2 years almost, writing a planned long manga series called Aegis, that I am just now starting to produce. So basically, I'm wanting to talk about this from the perspective of someone who is by no means an expert. However, I feel like I'm far enough along that if I were able to travel back in time and tell my past self, 3 years ago self, hey, do this, don't do this, that would be super useful. And basically, I'm just presuming that there are other people who are like me 3 years ago now, if that makes sense. So despite not being an expert, I just want to talk about stuff that has and hasn't worked for me. And honestly, some of this stuff I feel like you could save, or rather I wasted months and months and months of time doing things that just turned out to be totally ineffective. And sometimes I did things that actually I should have been doing that I didn't do, that I then had to make up and spend another 3 months doing something that I totally hadn't planned for. So at least today I kind of want to talk about I guess, the research stage of writing. Structurally, in this podcast, I'm probably going to talk for a fair number of episodes going through what I've kind of worked on so far and kind of talking about, what has worked, what hasn't worked, my general experiences with that. And then, meanwhile, kind of more current problems, I guess, will be sprinkled in. So you'll get, I guess, research and development, pre-production stuff. But meanwhile, right now, I'm starting to dabble in social media marketing stuff, which I probably won't talk about too much because it doesn't, personally right now, it doesn't really interest me that much, not going to lie, and particularly working with artists in production. Of the 5 artists I've worked with, all of them have been Japanese, and I have entirely communicated with them in Japanese. So hopefully that's like an interesting kind of twist to this, because as far as I know, not many other people, not saying that no one does this, I might not have looked hard enough, but I don't really know many other people who are doing that particular thing. So depending on whether that's of interest, I might kind of talk about my experiences, particularly working with Japanese people and particularly with how to navigate Japanese as a language, because it's quite difficult. And again, I am by no means an expert at it at all. In fact, I'm quite terrible at it still. But that actually goes to show you can be not amazing at the language, and I've been kind of shocked with what I've been able to do. I should interject here that just really quickly, almost to kind of prove credentials, these are some stills from 2 manga. I unfortunately can't release these yet as of, at the time of recording, October 2022. They're still in submission for 2 competitions and the Japanese competitions, so they have kind of strict rules about not releasing them on social media or whatever. However, if you do want to see them, I have a link in the description below. Currently, I have a link tree and you can click on that, find them. They'll be released for free when I'm allowed to release them. But anyway, so 2 projects I worked on that I'm reasonably happy with, and now I'm building up to finally being in production for this main series that I've been working on for quite a number of years now, and it's finally seeing the light of day. I'm very happy. And also, if you're not making manga, if you're just honestly, writing anything creative, if you're writing for short films, I think that this will still be useful to you. A lot of the same processes, just managing people, managing your time, editing. I found the transition from film to manga actually a lot smoother than I thought it would be, potentially. So, on the topic of research, now, I have a lot of bad experiences with this in a good way. I feel like I've failed in such spectacular ways with this that hopefully it's it's hopefully of use. Long story short, over the years, I would read various kinds of non-fiction books, and they would always be the things that inspired Aegis. That's good and bad, right? It's good in the sense that it gave me a lot of things that would be impossible, basically, for me to come up with on my own. That's kind of the main benefit of research, basically, is you're trying to pick up these nuggets of information that, without hyperbole, would literally take you 100 years to come up with. And you might not even come up with the idea. Or you can read it in a book. That does sound like hyperbole, but, for instance, if you read Plato, and you just try to imagine what people's perception of reality was like before Plato existed. It's like the average person, even a very intelligent person, is not going to be able to come up with the kinds of concepts he came up with. So on the one hand, great idea. Read a bunch of non-fiction books, read a bunch of books about ancient Greece, read a bunch of books about philosophy. Okay, cool. You got all these ideas coming in. However, unfortunately, I feel like that kind of trained me to think, okay, the only thing I need to do is ingest non-fiction books, and then I'll just have a good story. Or, it'll just be writing itself, basically. Now, I can say that in retrospect, in the sense that that's not exactly like a conscious, cognitive, thing you're thinking. You're not actually believing that delusion. But I think subconsciously, there's a sense of, oh yeah, this will just work out. I just need to keep on reading more and more of this stuff and it'll just work out. So basically what ended up happening is I spent the entirety of 2020, basically, just doing research. And I guess to spoil the end of the story, I did a bunch of research, and then when I went to write the script, I was like, oh, I actually totally did not research the right things. And I guess this is probably going to be a key concept that probably I end up talking about a lot, is this concept of really needing to validate what you're doing. And again, you can think of that in terms of the scientific method as well, right? If you read tons of theory about swimming and you don't know how to swim at all, so you go, okay, I'm just going to read, 100 books about swimming, but I'm not going to step foot in the water until I've read these 100 books. That's going to take me a year. And then you're going to go in the water and you're probably going to drown, because you've never had that real life testing. The problem basically is one of selectivity, right? You've gone, okay, the topic is swimming. Now, out of swimming, I think, maybe let's say naturally, of course, as an example, naturally you might have, strong legs. So your legs and, whatever you're kicking, that might actually not be a problem when you're swimming. It actually might be you just have quite a particular problem. You might have a problem with, the way you go up for breaths when you're doing freestyle or whatever. And so the logical thing to do would be, let's say, you had to read something. Maybe you read a book on swimming, then you swim a little bit, and then you realize, and you can kind of narrow down, oh, well, I'm actually good at kicking, but actually I suck at breathing, so maybe I should get particular practice in my breathing, and then I practice breathing, and this is all super duper obvious, and a lot of this stuff is really obvious, and it's incredible that you fall for it. You still fall for it. It's crazy, right? It's insane that in retrospect you can just be like, why did I think that not testing any of this stuff made sense? Why did I think that I would know the kinds of stuff I had to research and the kinds of stuff I had to basically outline in my story? That's actually a kind of point I failed to address, is that I'm talking about both research and outlining. So by outlining, I mean, writing descriptions of characters and writing descriptions of plot events and writing, this is what's going to happen here, and then this should happen, this should happen, this should happen, and here are my thoughts on what the themes are going to be, and here's what, aspects of the world. And of course, I'm not averse to outlining at all. All of these things are tools. They're just, you have to use them in a balanced manner and don't treat everything like a nail, basically, that needs to be hammered in, which is pretty much, like I'm saying, what I did with research. To use that swimming analogy, because I hadn't actually gone and like validated, my experiences, right? I hadn't gone and just said, okay, I'm going to try and write the first scene. And because I didn't do that thing that I could have easily done in a day or two, seriously cost me many months. After a year of researching, I came to a point where I was so frustrated by the fact that I hadn't started yet. I had planned to start writing. I'd actually planned to release Aegis midway through 2020. Now, keep in mind, it's now near the end of 2022, and I've just started production. So, so you can kind of see where the timeline. I was just like a little bit off, just a tiny bit off with that. Anyway, that happened to me. Eventually, after a year, I was so fed up with. I was like, I'm just fucking researching this stuff endlessly. I have to just start writing this. And I said, I don't care. I'm just going to write this first scene. And then I went to write the first scene, and I went, oh, that main character's motivation doesn't really make sense in context. Like, on paper, it kind of made sense, but now that I'm trying to write this, I'm realizing, oh, this doesn't really feel, emotionally real. Like, this just feels fake. Oh, and I've just based so many elements of my story and of the research. I've based that around this idea that is actually just false. Oh, and so that had a kind of cascading effect on, obviously the main character's motivation. Pretty big, pretty big deal, pretty big aspect of the story. So that, it wasn't just that alone, honestly. It was, it's hard to pinpoint. It's just the fact that, like swimming, you're going to get in the water and you can't predict what that's going to be like if you've never been in water before. You've never even had a bath. You've never had a shower. You're some kind of sand hermit, desert hermit. Even they have water. They have oases. You're some kind of the driest man in the world. You've come from the moon and you've never swum before. You've never even seen water. It's just you're not going to be able to predict what it's going to be like. And so I sort of had that, I think people have that to varying degrees with things. They'll plan, maybe they'll plan some stuff for a story, they'll look some stuff up, and then they'll go to write it. And the shift will be minor. Because you'll go, oh, it's actually like that. Oh, it's actually like that. And it's more like helpful. It's more like a stepping stone. Oh, I kind of thought it was going to be like this, and it's actually like this. That's actually useful, I think. However, this is a case where we're talking about a year of progress in one direction. A year of every day straying 1%, further from the true kind of path. It sounds very religious. I was going to say straying further from God. Then after a year, after a year, if it's 365 days and you've gone 1% degree each way, there's a circle, I guess. But imagine that you're completely fucking off, basically. Even incrementally being off for a year, you're going to be off big margin graphs or whatever, So that's kind of what happened to me. And here's, I guess, how to prevent it, I suppose. So luckily, what I'll say is that if you're in that position where you have, developed something for a really long time in terms of research, in terms of theory, for those people who have, let's say, built large worlds and they do intend to write at some point, I think it is vitally important that you at least attempt, even if you know it's going to suck, this is really important, even if you know it's going to be fucking terrible, you just have to write something, because that is the thing that is going to basically allow you to validate where your research is heading, where your developments in the world are heading. Because it's immediately, especially something like writing, you can only write until you can no longer think of what to write. I believe, I forget who said it, might have been Aaron Sorkin said, I don't want to misattribute this to someone, but famous writer said, writer's block doesn't exist. It's just people basically not having things to write. Now, I don't agree that it doesn't exist at all, but I do agree with the sense that, like, if you are not coming up with something, I think a large part of that is because there is some kind of blockage. And that's completely fine. The point is that you should be trying to get to those blockages as soon and as frequently as possible. So I kind of go with the phrase fail faster. You're just trying to constantly get to that fail state faster and faster and faster and faster, so you can see, okay, what am I missing? What am I missing? What am I missing? And so, for instance, if after 2 weeks of research, let's say, instead of a year, if after 2 weeks I tried to write a first scene of what I was going for, that might be a little bit early, to be fair. It's going to differ depending on what you're writing. Again, some things do legitimately take a while to research. Sorry, I shouldn't use 3 weeks as an analogy. I'll use a different series I'm currently writing. It's a series that required me to research quite a bit about a topic I didn't know about, really, which is post-war Japan. And this sort of, it's reasonably obscure. It kind of came as a branch off of, existing research about post-war Japan, but sort of there, a decadence culture emerged called Kasatori culture, which is named after a kind of moonshine. And that really fascinated me, that particular culture. And so, in that case, this is after writing Aegis, learning from that, I said, okay, I'm just going to try and get the bare minimum that's required for me to start writing this. And I'm going to try and write it well before I'm actually comfortable with writing it. That's a hard thing to recommend, being uncomfortable, but it kind of... it's kind of the way the human brain's wired. Not that I'm a neuroscientist, but it's a lot easier to accept these kind of low-level pains rather than certain kinds of sharp mental pains. So I think a lot of people, and me included, this is pretty much what happened. I was too scared to write. And it is a scary thing because you're just completely putting yourself out there, even to yourself, especially to yourself. You're just putting yourself out there, and it's almost certainly going to be shit the first thing you write. In fact, that's Stephen King says the first 1,000,000 words you write suck. So you should get writing immediately and write a lot, which is sort of what I'm saying with failing faster. But yeah, I'm basically recommending you want to start writing when you're not comfortable with writing. And you just kind of have to, I'm going to be really careful to try and not be imperative. You don't have to do anything. This is all just my own experience. This is what's worked for me. I think there is a logic to it. I've been able to rationalize things in the past that sounded like a good idea before. Like I said, no, you can't start writing. For instance, you can't start writing. You've got to know everything about ancient Greek culture. You've actually got to learn Latin and ancient Greek. That was something I did actually believe at one point, although I dropped reasonably quickly, because they're fairly hard languages, as it turns out. If you catch me saying, oh, this is what you should do, that's just a slip of the tongue. It's unintentional. I really, you shouldn't have to be, I'm not trying to, force anyone to do anything. And, I think the name of the game is experiment. So if you want to experiment with the stuff I'm talking about, I think that's great. If you experiment with 100 other things, even better. I just happen to think that what I'm talking about, I think that it would work for a number of people, but also, to be fair, I don't have decades and decades of, experience writing. My opinions on this are going to get more nuanced. My opinions have already, as I'm talking about, completely changed from, 3 years ago. So, not that I think that this advice will be completely, invalid in a year or whatever. But yeah, what I'm saying is it's anecdotal. With this post-war Japanese series, I did only enough research that was required in my mind for me to start writing. And I started writing before I was ready. And I wrote a draft, and it turned out I wasn't ready. But that's completely fine, because it showed me, oh, I actually wasn't ready, but in a way that I didn't really understand at the time. It was actually, what's missing, right, the critical component, the chunk that's missing, is, the side character is not working. Actually, they should be the main character. Actually, it should be perspectively shifted. So now actually they're the main character. But if I had not tested that, the problem is because you don't know what the problem is, and there might be 30 different problems you're working on, instead of being able to focus on, let's say, 3 key problems. Okay, this character isn't working. Okay, I actually need to know more about, the structure of the US military, what they were doing in Japan. That's something, I only realized when I wrote this thing, or maybe I picked up 3 key things. Oh, yeah, these are actually making me, unable to write this, or this doesn't feel real at all. And that allows you to work on those three things instead of, if you don't test, if you don't write, reasonably early, if you delay it until it's perfect, you might end up building up these, 30 different problems, right? You might build them up, and then it turns out you didn't even fucking need many of them. You only needed like 3. And so, to go back to Aegis, or Aegis, man, it's pretty bad. I can never remember the actual Greek pronunciation. Very embarrassing. It was actually called Ambrosia for many years, but I've decided Aegis is a better title. It's more accurate to the series. But anyway, with Aegis, series set in ancient Greece, I followed certain leads, where it was like, oh, this is an interesting part of this culture. I think it does fit with the story. That stuff's legitimate. However, it started getting into, okay, now I'm reading books on Homeric linguistic analysis. It's like, if that was, a super specific subject in the series, cool, totally fine, totally, legitimate. But it's not. That was just my almost, it's kind of like hoarding. It's almost that idea of, oh, well, maybe I'll need this for later. Maybe I need this. Like, maybe this information will come in handy. Totally the wrong way to go about it, because then you're just going to be you're going to be one of those crazy old women who are like in the garbage, picking up people's dentures, because they actually probably would need dentures, but, picking up like rusty sporks or something, and you're like, oh, well, I might need it. I might need these sporks. Don't be fucking crazy old woman picking up sporks. You fucking idiot. Do it in a validated manner. Do it in the sense of, okay, I've actually, that just sparked a memory. I use this analogy, and I think this makes probably the most sense, is camping. I've now had multiple analogies, and they're hopefully getting better. This analogy of camping. If you've never been camping before, you're probably, there are factors that you're just not going to be able to predict. I actually don't go camping that much, so my examples are not going to be good. But you might forget, oh shit, mosquitoes are going to be around, so I really need to bring, bug spray. Or, even basic one like, how do I get hot water? Is there electricity? Can I get solar-powered lights? Do I have toilet paper? Do I actually have like, if I'm sleeping on the ground on rock, how cold is it getting in this area? Tons of problems. Same goes with anything that has multiple levels of complexity, but, that you haven't done before. Anyone who's had experience with filmmaking will know what I'm talking about with, even if you plan meticulously, you get there on the day, something's going wrong. But the point is that the best thing to do would be just take a basic list of things from, let's say, camping sites, websites about camping, things you should bring. You go camping for like 1 day, really short test period, and then you're probably going to go, oh, me personally, I really need 2 pillows. Not actually me, but, I actually really get cold easily, or I really, like the bugs really bother me. I just can't handle that. You're going to have these personal preference things on top of existing things like, oh shit, I forgot, the fire starter, so we just didn't have a fire the whole time. Then the next time, you're going to be infinitely more prepared. Let's say that you went camping once a weekend. Even for, just even a couple of hours, just went out into Australia or the outback. You're going to be infinitely more experienced, even after probably a month, than someone who, let's say, just tried to theoretically research the best possible things about camping. They're going to go camping, and they're going to realize, oh shit, even after I planned all this stuff, I still fucking failed to account for this, and then they have to catch up to all the progress you've already had. So, long story short, going back to what I was talking about before, that's pretty much what I failed to do, and it's probably one of the single biggest, it was, on multiple levels, extremely shit. I read a lot of difficult stuff that I just did not need, and it's hard to actually tell the extent of the damage now. Not damage, that sounds really dramatic, but now that I'm starting to basically, to be clear, I'm starting to basically produce a script. So I've written a very long script for this manga series. Really just the first, previously it was the first kind of episode that I considered being just like a volume in length. I kind of conceptualized it like, almost like a HBO kind of premiere. Sometimes their premieres are like hour and a half or whatever, or just almost like an hour long HBO kind of episode where it's pretty cohesively one thing. It's turned out that it's probably more like 2 volumes long, just because, again, I hadn't validated, and so I actually had no idea how scripts, translated to manga yet, and I still don't have, the best sense of that. I'm still learning that. Now that I'm finally, we're finally starting to get this thing going, and we're finally starting to do the storyboards for pages, and we're starting to get, roughs back and so on and so forth, like rough sketches of the pages back from the artist. I'm going to slowly, I guess, see more and more, and I guess you'll hear more and more as I'm developing this. It's like, okay, how much of this research, I'm talking about reading many, many, many books, taking tons and tons of notes, probably hundreds of hours of research. And it's like, okay, I barely used any of it in the writing. How much am I going to use in the actual art production stage? Probably not very much. So, huge waste of time, immense cognitive load in terms of a waste. Just like your brain just fucking melted on some of this stuff. Not all of it's bad. A lot of it was good, but I would say it couldn't be more than 50% was actually useful. I probably wasted 6 months. 6 months of full-time fucking work. This is during a period where very luckily, I didn't lose my job, but based on the welfare system in Australia, basically, I got paid welfare, I guess, for my hours got affected by COVID, basically film. I guess I work in film post-production in a very boring, extremely boring, non-creative job, but that all got affected, of course, by film. Film, one of the things that was impacted by Corona in a big way, and it's still being affected, especially post-production. Everything's super clogged up. Anyway, but yeah, so at that time, I was just getting welfare, so I just had full time to work on this. That's probably another reason I feel really guilty about. I had all that free time then, and I spent it doing something extremely difficult. Effort was not the problem. Extremely difficult, extremely mentally taxing, and it was at least 50% not worth it. And in fact, the problem isn't so much that I wasted 6 months, it's that I could have spent 6 months of totally free time, not exactly, but basically full time working on this thing in a much, much, much more efficient capacity. So I think that's where I'll leave it for today, because I don't want to get this too long. Again, I actually want to validate a podcast, right? As you can see, I'm not, I don't hate this set, but it is blank, and, I'd like to have something a bit better later. And so I really need, though, to have a first step. I need to put out a podcast and then get, feedback. So your feedback would be very appreciated. Tell me, I guess, is this useful? What things would you like me to talk about? So on and so forth. Thank you if you do that. I really appreciate it. But yeah, that's my point, right? This is a good example. You need that first step, so then I can, rewatch this and go, oh, this background sucks, and actually I just rambled a ton, and the lighting looks weird, or so on and so forth. A million issues that I couldn't have predicted before I recorded this, right? So yeah, starting before I'm ready. If I wanted to start a podcast talking about my writing experiences, and I started when I felt confident about them and felt like ready, like, oh, now I'm an expert. Not that I think I'm an expert, but now I'm ready. It'll be like 10 years from now. And the problem is that doing this helps you train your experience. Teaching things to people helps you get better at organizing it in your mind. It helps hopefully build, a small, nice little community around this where it's mutually beneficial. There are all these kinds of benefits that basically, I don't want to be like too preachy kind of, or not like that. There's a guy in Donnie Darko, the like fear, love axis kind of motivational speaker, but really a lot of the time it's basically just fear and fear of wounding the ego kind of that's preventing a lot of people, I think, and including me, from at that point more so from pushing forward and starting something that I wasn't comfortable with starting. And that's not something that I'm like over. It's just something that I have processes that allow me to like I wouldn't say force myself to do it, but now I can kind of be like, okay, I know I'm feeling that, but da 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 da. Oh, you'll have to tune in next time. Oh, it's like the ending. Oh, to know what those processes are. It's like the ending of this is its own Hiki-Goma. Whoa. I probably should have plugged this earlier on, but if you want to check out any of my stuff, it's all in the description. Unfortunately, like, half those films like aren't done yet, including my own. Can't shit on people too much. I haven't finished my own film in like 3+ years. I've been busy wasting my time for 6 months, as you just heard. Well, it's actually more than 6 months, as we'll find out later. But yeah, all my stuff's in the description below. I have a Twitter and Instagram if you want to kind of have updates, particularly about the manga stuff. I have this YouTube channel where I talk, I guess if you want to hear me talk more about particularly media analysis stuff, I think there's some good stuff on there. I've also got my mailing list for stuff that's going to come out. I'm going to release those 2 chapters I mentioned before totally for free. And the 2 series that are currently in production, Aegis and Kasatori, the ancient Greek one and the post-war Japanese one, which I'll talk about them more in detail later. I just I didn't want to get too bogged down in that stuff today. The first chapters of both of those I'll release to people for free, so if you're on that mailing list, please sign up. You'll get some good stuff, and I'd love your feedback on all of this. Thank you very much. Farewell.